Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something straight from the heart. How many of you have ever been left on read? You poured out your thoughts, hit send, and then crickets, nothing, silence. And doesn't that silence feel louder than any response could ever be? See, communication is one of the most powerful tools we have, but silence is also communication. It's not just the absence of words, it's a message. And your job isn't to react emotionally to that silence, it's to respond intelligently. Now, the average person will follow up with something desperate, something needy. Hey, did you see my last message? No, that's not the move. Because in that moment, you've handed over your power. You've told them you're in control here, and I'm chasing. But if you understand human psychology, and I want you to lean in here because this is where the gold is, you'll know that people respond to two things, curiosity and uncertainty. When someone doesn't reply, the best follow-up isn't a long, drawn-out explanation. No, it's something short, something impactful, something like, I wasn't expecting that. Boom, just 4 words. But do you feel the weight of them? Immediately, their brain starts racing. What weren't they expecting? Did I miss something? Did I mess up? This message does 2 things. First, it creates mystery. Second, it flips the dynamic. Now, they're the ones seeking clarification. They're the ones chasing you. But here's the key. Don't just use this as a manipulation tactic. The reason this works is because it communicates self-respect. It says, hey, I value my time and energy. If you don't, that's fine, but I'm not going to beg for your attention. You see, communication is a dance. It's not about control, it's about rhythm. You give, you pull back, they lean in. Now, let me hit you with one more principle timing. You don't send this message 5 minutes after being ignored. You wait. You allow space for their thoughts to settle. And then when the moment's right, you drop those 4 words. So here's my challenge to you the next time someone doesn't reply. Don't panic, don't chase, and don't crumble. Instead, lean back, smile, and say those magic words, I wasn't expecting that. And then, watch them go crazy. Because communication isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the voice they can't stop thinking about. Let's go make it happen. Let me ask you something. Why does it sting when someone doesn't reply to your message? Why does it feel like a micro rejection, even if it's just a digital silence? The answer, my friends, is rooted deep in our psychology. You see, humans are hardwired to seek connection, validation, and acknowledgement. From the moment we're born, we rely on signals from others, eye contact, a smile, a nod to know we're safe, valued, and understood. When those signals are absent, when someone chooses silence over a response, it doesn't just feel like a gap in communication, it feels like a gap in connection. And connection, my friends, is one of our most fundamental needs. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When someone doesn't reply, your brain doesn't just shrug and move on. Oh no, your brain goes into overdrive trying to fill in the blanks. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Are they ignoring me on purpose? And the longer the silence stretches, the louder those questions become. This is what psychologists call a cognitive gap. Your brain hates uncertainty. It wants resolution, clarity, and closure. And if it can't get a real answer, it'll create one. That's why you start overthinking, replaying the message in your head, analyzing every word, every emoji, every punctuation mark. But here's the kicker, that same psychological principle works on them too. Think about this for a moment. When you don't reply to someone who's waiting for an answer, what happens? They start doing the same thing. Their brain starts racing, their curiosity spikes, and they become consumed with figuring out why you've gone silent. And that, my friends, is the psychological dynamic you need to understand if you want to communicate with power and precision. But let's pause here because there's an even deeper layer to this. Human psychology isn't just about reaction, it's about perception. People aren't just responding to your words, they're responding to how those words make them feel. And when you send a follow-up message after being ignored, your words are either going to communicate confidence or desperation. And let me tell you something, people can smell desperation from a mile away. Desperation repels. Confidence, on the other hand, attracts. Here's an example. If someone doesn't reply and you send, hey, did you see my last message? What does that communicate? It communicates uncertainty. It communicates a fear of being overlooked. But if instead you respond with something that sparks curiosity, something like, I wasn't expecting that you're flipping the script. You're not chasing, you're subtly drawing them back into the conversation. Why? Because now they're the ones who feel uncertain. And uncertainty, when paired with curiosity, is a powerful cocktail. You see, the goal in communication isn't to get an immediate response every time. The goal is to maintain your sense of self-worth and value, even in silence. When someone doesn't reply, it's not always about you. They could be busy, they could be distracted, they could be processing your message. But when you react emotionally, when you send frantic follow-ups, you're letting their silence dictate your emotional state. And that's not power, that's giving your power away. Now let's flip it. Imagine you send a message, you don't get a reply, but instead of reacting emotionally, you respond strategically. You understand the psychology at play. You know that silence creates tension, and you know how to use that tension to your advantage. Maybe you wait. Maybe you drop a subtle follow-up that sparks curiosity. Whatever your choice, it comes from a place of control, not reactivity. That, my friends, is emotional intelligence in action. So what's the takeaway here? Human psychology is a game of patterns, triggers, and responses. People want what they can't fully have. They're drawn to what feels slightly out of reach. And when you understand that dynamic, you stop chasing people for their attention. Instead, you earn it. You invite it. And most importantly, you command it not with loud words, but with the quiet power of understanding how the human mind works. At the end of the day, communication isn't just about what you say, it's about how you make them feel. And when you master that, you'll not only get more replies, but you'll build connections that are rooted in respect, curiosity, and value. That's the power of understanding human psychology. That's how you turn silence into strategy. Let me tell you something powerful. Humans are deeply, profoundly drawn to mystery. We can't help it. It's like a gravitational pull on our attention. The moment something feels slightly uncertain, slightly ambiguous, our brains go into detective mode. We start asking questions, analyzing clues, and trying to bridge the gap between what we know and what we don't know. And in communication, especially when someone hasn't replied to your message, mystery becomes one of the most powerful tools in your arsenal. Why does mystery work so well? Because it triggers something called the Zeigarnik effect. It's a psychological principle that says our minds are wired to remember unfinished tasks and unresolved situations more vividly than completed ones. When you leave something open-ended, when you create curiosity without immediately satisfying it, you create an itch in the other person's mind, an itch that demands to be scratched. Think about cliffhangers in movies or TV shows. Why do they keep you coming back for the next episode? Because the story is unresolved. You need to know what happens next. And here's the key: that same principle applies to your messages. When someone doesn't reply, most people make the mistake of over-explaining or over-following up. They write long paragraphs, they plead, they apologize unnecessarily. But what happens when you do that? You close the loop, you remove the mystery, you give them all the answers, and their brain doesn't need to think about you anymore. You become predictable, and predictability kills curiosity. Instead, if you send something short, something slightly cryptic, something that doesn't give them all the answers, you flip the power dynamic. Now they're the ones wondering, what did they mean by that? Are they upset? Are they fine without me? Did I miss something? Let me give you an example. Imagine you send someone a text and they don't reply. Hours go by, maybe even days. Instead of sending a neat follow-up like, hey, did you see my last message? You dropped something simple, something intriguing, like, wow, I didn't expect that. Or interesting choice, or even noted these are short, they're loaded with implication. And most importantly, they leave space. Space for the other person to wonder, space for their brain to start filling in the blanks. And you know what happens? They start thinking about you. You become the unfinished task in their mind. You become the cliffhanger they need to resolve. But here's the important part: you can't fake this. You can't just copy and paste a mysterious message and expect it to always work. It has to come from a place of self-assuredness. Mystery works when it's paired with authentic confidence. If you're using mystery as a tactic, but underneath you're still desperate for their reply, they'll feel it. People are incredibly good at sensing emotional incongruence. So your mindset matters. When you use mystery, you need to be okay with whatever happens next. Whether they reply or not, you remain centered, focused, and confident in your own value. You see, in communication, especially in digital conversations, people don't just respond to your words, they respond to the energy behind your words. Mystery carries a certain energy. It feels confident, it feels intentional, and it feels slightly out of reach. And what happens when something feels out of reach? People want to reach for it even more. Think about luxury brands. Why do people covet them? It's not just about the quality of the product, it's about the perceived exclusivity. And exclusivity is rooted in mystery. But, and this is key, you have to know when to stop. Mystery works because it leaves room for curiosity. If you follow up a mysterious message with 5 more clarifying messages, you kill the effect. You've got to learn the art of sending a single sharp, mysterious follow-up and then waiting. Waiting without anxiety. Waiting without second-guessing yourself. Waiting because you know the seed has been planted and now it's up to them to water it. At its core, mystery is about creating space. It's about leaving gaps intentionally so the other person feels compelled to fill them. And when you master this skill, you'll notice something incredible. People start leaning into your conversations. They start chasing your clarity. And most importantly, start valuing your communication because it feels different. It feels deliberate. It feels magnetic. So the next time someone doesn't reply, don't fill the silence with noise. Instead, drop a carefully crafted message that sparks curiosity, then lean back, smile, and let human psychology do the rest. Because mystery isn't about being unclear, it's about being intriguing. And when you master that, you'll not only get more replies, you'll get more attention. And attention, my friends, is the currency of connection. Let me ask you something. When you send a message and don't get a reply, what's the first instinct most people have? It's to chase, to follow up, to seek closure. And at its core, that reaction comes from a very human need to feel seen, to feel acknowledged. But here's the hard truth: the moment you start chasing, you lose power. Because chasing communicates one thing loud and clear: you value their validation more than your own self-respect. And my friends, that's a dangerous place to operate from. You see, in every interaction, whether it's personal, professional, or romantic, there's an invisible negotiation happening. And that negotiation isn't just about words, it's about perceived value. When someone doesn't reply to you, their silence creates a space. And in that space, you have 2 choices. You can fill it with neediness, or you can fill it with value. Most people don't realize this, but every follow-up message you send is communicating a silent message about how you view yourself. Are you saying, I need you to respond to feel okay about myself? Or are you saying, I value myself and I'll communicate with people who respect my time and energy? Because whether you realize it or not, the other person can feel that energy. And let me tell you, value isn't loud, it's calm. It's composed, it doesn't beg, and it doesn't chase. Think about the most magnetic people you know. Are they the ones constantly seeking attention, constantly asking for validation, constantly reminding you of their presence? No, they're the ones who seem comfortable in their own skin. They're the ones who communicate with intention and then step back with confidence. And here's the kicker: they don't chase, because they know their worth isn't dependent on someone else's response. Now let's talk about the psychology behind this. When you chase someone's attention, you trigger a very specific response in their brain. It's called reactance. Reactance is what happens when someone feels like their freedom to choose is being restricted. When you chase, you're unintentionally putting pressure on them to respond, and their natural reaction is often to pull away further. On the flip side, when you communicate with calm confidence and value, you're triggering a completely different response. You're inviting them in instead of pushing them. Here's a practical example. Let's say you send a message and there's no reply. Instead of following up with, hey, just checking if you saw my message, which screams uncertainty, you could say something like, no worries, if you're busy, just let me know when you're free to connect. That's a message that communicates value. It says, I respect your time, but I also respect mine, and that subtle shift changes everything. But value isn't just about words, it's about actions. If someone isn't giving you the energy or respect you deserve, sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is step back. Not in anger, not in spite, but in self-respect. Because stepping back doesn't just send a message to them, it sends a message to you. It reinforces your own sense of worth. It reminds you that your value isn't dictated by someone else's acknowledgement of it. Now, I want to make something clear. This isn't about playing games. It's not about being cold or manipulative. It's about being centered. It's about recognizing that your worth isn't up for negotiation. When you communicate from a place of value, you're saying, I know what I bring to the table, and I'm not afraid to eat alone if I have to. And that mindset, it's magnetic. People are naturally drawn to those who carry themselves with confidence and self-respect. Why? Because value is attractive. When you value yourself, you set a standard. And here's the beautiful thing about standards: they don't require explanation. They're felt. They're understood. And people either rise to meet them or they don't. Either way, you win. Now let's tie this together. Every message you send is an opportunity to communicate not just information, but energy. Are you communicating value or are you communicating desperation? Are you reinforcing your self-worth or are you outsourcing it to someone else's reply? These are the questions you need to ask yourself. Because the moment you start showing up in your communication with a sense of value and self-respect, everything changes. So the next time someone doesn't reply, don't react from a place of fear. Respond from a place of value. Maybe you follow up with a confident, concise message. Maybe you step back entirely. Either way, do it with intention. Do it with clarity. And most importantly, do it with the knowledge that your worth isn't tied to their response. Because at the end of the day, value doesn't chase. It doesn't beg. It doesn't crumble in silence. Value stands tall. And when you embody that, not only will people reply, they'll start respecting you in ways you've never experienced before. That's the power of leading with value. That's the secret to shifting the dynamic in every interaction you have. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were carrying the entire weight of a conversation? Like you were the only one investing energy, time, and thought into keeping the connection alive? It's exhausting, isn't it? Because communication at its core is a two-way street. It's not meant to be one-sided. When one person keeps showing up while the other stays silent or non-committal, there's an imbalance. And here's the truth: when imbalance becomes the norm, respect starts to erode both from them towards you and from you towards yourself. You see, every time you communicate with someone, there's an unspoken agreement happening. It says, I'll give you my time, my energy, and my attention, and I trust that you'll value it enough to reciprocate. But when someone stops holding up their end of that agreement, when they stop replying, when they go silent without explanation, you're left with a choice. Do you keep pouring your energy into an empty space, or do you recognize that communication isn't just about effort, it's about balance? Now, here's where most people make the mistake: they double down. They start chasing. They send more messages, longer messages, overly polite follow-ups, or even guilt trips like, I guess you're too busy for me now. And while those reactions are human, they come from a place of wanting clarity, connection, or closure. They're also counterproductive. Why? Because they create a dynamic where one person is overfunctioning and the other is underfunctioning. And relationships, whether personal, professional, or casual, can't thrive in that imbalance. Communication is like a dance. There's a rhythm to it. One person steps forward and the other steps back. Then they switch. But if one person keeps lunging forward while the other remains motionless, it stops being a dance, it becomes a chase. And here's the uncomfortable truth: people are rarely drawn to the one who's doing all the chasing. Why? Because chasing communicates scarcity. It signals that you value their attention more than they value yours. And in that dynamic, respect starts to fade. But let's pause here, because I want you to understand something deeply important. Stepping back isn't about punishing the other person. It's not about playing games or trying to manipulate them into responding. It's about respecting yourself. It's about recognizing that your time, your energy, and your presence are valuable. And if someone isn't showing up to meet you halfway, it's not your job to carry them the rest of the way. Because here's the reality: when someone values your presence, they'll show it. When someone respects your time, they'll protect it. And when someone cares about communicating with you, they'll make the effort. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, but what if they're busy? What if they have a good reason? And sure, sometimes life happens. People get overwhelmed, they get distracted. But, and this is crucial, busy isn't the same as disinterested. A person who values you will still find a moment, even in their busiest days, to say, hey, I saw your message. I'll get back to you when I can. It's not about having endless availability. It's about showing basic respect. And if someone can't even offer that, it's not your job to keep justifying their silence. You see, communication is also about boundaries. Boundaries aren't about controlling someone else. They're about setting expectations for yourself. They're about saying, I'll show up fully and authentically, but I won't keep pouring into a space that doesn't pour back into me. And those boundaries, they're not walls, they're filters. They filter out the people who can't meet you at your level and make space for the ones who can. So what do you do when someone doesn't reply? You step back. You resist the urge to fill the silence with noise. You let the space breathe. And you remind yourself of this truth: someone else's inconsistency is not a reflection of your worth. Their silence is not an invitation for you to prove your value. In fact, sometimes the most powerful message you can send is no message at all. Not out of spite, not of anger, but out of self-respect. Because here's the thing, when you step back, you create space for clarity. You allow the other person to make a choice. Will they lean in or will they step away? Either way, you get your answer. At the end of the day, communication isn't just about words, it's about reciprocity. It's about two people showing up with intention, curiosity, and respect. And when that reciprocity isn't there, your role isn't to chase, it's to step back, stand tall, and trust that the right people will match your energy. Because the people who truly value your presence won't need to be reminded to show up. They'll just show up. So the next time you feel yourself stepping into that chasing role, pause. Take a breath. And remind yourself communication is a two-way street. And if someone isn't walking towards you, you're allowed to stop walking towards them. Not with bitterness, not with frustration, but with the quiet confidence that your time, your energy, and your presence deserve to be met with the same level of respect you're offering. And when you operate from that place, trust me, you'll start to attract people who truly value what you bring to the table. Let me share something with you. Silence is one of the most powerful tools in communication, but most people don't know how to use it. In fact, most people are terrified of it. The moment there's a pause, an unanswered message, or an unreturned call, they rush to fill the void with words, more text, longer explanations, apologies, justifications. But here's the truth, silence isn't empty. Silence is a space, and in that space, there's power. When someone doesn't reply to your message, your instinct might be to follow up immediately to demand clarity, to get closure, to feel seen. But what if I told you that your silence, your intentional silence, can sometimes speak louder than any message you could ever send? Silence creates contrast. It creates a vacuum. And here's the key: people notice what's missing. When you stop chasing, when you stop filling the air with noise, it makes the other person feel the absence of your presence. And that absence, it can be far more impactful than any clever text or follow-up message. Think about it like this: when you're constantly available, constantly over-explaining, and constantly showing up, even when someone isn't reciprocating, you become like background noise. Predictable, expected. But when you pull back, when you let silence do the talking, you shift the energy. Suddenly you're not predictable anymore. Suddenly there's a question mark hanging in the air. And questions, my friends, are far more powerful than answers. Questions make people think. Questions make people feel. But here's the thing: silence isn't just about withholding communication from the other person. It's also about creating space for yourself, space to pause, space to reflect, space to ask yourself, why am I chasing someone who isn't meeting me halfway? Why do I feel the need to fill this gap with endless words and messages? What does this silence actually tell me about this relationship, this interaction, or this dynamic? Because silence isn't just a tool for them, it's also a tool for you. It's a mirror. It shows you where your insecurities are, where your fears are, and where you might be outsourcing your sense of worth to someone else's validation. And let me tell you this: people respect silence when it's intentional. Because silence isn't passive, it's active. It's a choice. It's you saying, I'm not going to beg for your attention. I'm not going to chase your response. I'm going to let this space exist, and if you want to step into it, you're welcome to. But I'm not going to force it. That kind of silence carries weight. It carries presence, and presence, my friends, is magnetic. But let's be real, holding silence isn't always easy. It can feel uncomfortable. It can feel vulnerable. It can trigger every insecurity you have about being ignored, overlooked, or undervalued. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. Because when you learn to sit in that silence, when you learn to own that silence, you're no longer reacting from a place of fear. You're acting from a place of strength. You're sending a message without saying a word. I value myself enough to let this space breathe. You see, most people underestimate the power of absence. They think if they're not constantly showing up, they'll be forgotten. But the opposite is often true. When someone notices your absence, when they notice the shift in energy, it forces them to pause and reflect. They start asking themselves, why haven't they followed up? Did I miss something? Are they upset? Are they moving on without me? And just like that, you've shifted the power dynamic. Not through manipulation, not through gains, but through self-respect. And here's something important. Silence isn't about punishment. It's not about making someone feel bad. It's not about trying to control their behavior. It's about setting a boundary. It's about saying, I'm willing to communicate, but I'm not willing to beg. I'm willing to invest my energy, but I'm not willing to waste it. That's not cold, that's confident. That's not distant, that's deliberate. But silence only works if you trust it. If you break the silence too soon, if you rush back in with anxious follow-ups, you dilute its power. Silence needs time to create its impact. It's like planting a seed. You don't dig it up every 5 minutes to see if it's growing. You water it, you leave it alone, and you trust the process. The same applies here. So the next time someone doesn't reply, instead of sending 3 more messages trying to fill the gap, lean into the silence, hold it, own it, trust it. Because sometimes the most profound message you can send isn't a message at all, it's the space between messages. It's the pause. It's the stillness. And here's the beautiful thing, people who value you, people who respect you, people who see you, they'll notice your silence, they'll feel it, and they'll respond. And if they don't, that silence also gave you clarity. It showed you exactly where you stand. And clarity, my friends, is worth its weight in gold. So let silence do its work. Trust it. Honor it. Because in a world full of noise, silence speaks volumes. Let me ask you something. When someone doesn't reply to your message, what story do you tell yourself? Because whether you realize it or not, you're always telling yourself a story. Maybe it's they're ignoring me because I'm not important. Or they must not care about me. Or maybe it's I must have said something wrong, but here's the truth, you don't have all the information. And yet your brain is wired to fill in those gaps. Why? Because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. Silence feels uncomfortable. And so your mind starts crafting narratives to make sense of that discomfort. But here's the thing, most of the stories we tell ourselves in moments like this aren't true. They're fear-based. They're built on our insecurities, our past wounds, and our deepest doubts about our own worthiness. And the danger isn't just that these stories are often false, it's that we believe them. We internalize them. We start showing up in our communication from a place of fear instead of confidence, and fear-based communication. It never creates connection. It creates more distance. Now, let's get practical about this. When you don't get a reply, your brain is going to want to jump to conclusions. It's natural, it's human. But what if, instead of defaulting to the worst-case scenario, you paused and asked yourself a simple question, what else could this mean? Because the truth is, there are 1,000 reasons why someone might not reply. They might be busy. They might have seen your message at a bad time. They might have intended to reply but got distracted. Or maybe, and this is important, it has nothing to do with you at all. You see, not every silence is a reflection of your worth. Sometimes it's just a reflection of their life, their priorities, or even their communication style. And when you start to realize that someone else's actions or inactions don't always have to mean something about you, you take your power back. You stop attaching your self-worth to someone else's behavior. You stop giving them control over how you feel about yourself. But let me be clear, this doesn't mean you ignore patterns. If someone consistently leaves you hanging, if someone repeatedly disregards your messages or shows a lack of respect for your time, that's information. That's not a story, it's data. And data helps you make decisions. It helps you set boundaries. It helps you decide whether this relationship, this interaction, or this connection is worth your continued investment. Here's what I want you to understand, your emotional state doesn't have to be at the mercy of someone else's inconsistency. You have the power to take a step back, to pause and to ask yourself, what story am I telling myself right now? And is it serving me? Because the stories we tell ourselves aren't just thoughts, they're blueprints. They shape how we act, how we feel, and ultimately how we show up in our relationships. Now let's flip this around. Imagine someone doesn't reply to your message, and instead of spiraling into self-doubt or frustration, you pause, you breathe. And you remind yourself, their silence isn't about me. I'm still valuable, I'm still worthy, and I'm still in control of how I respond to this moment. That shift isn't small, it's everything. Because when you stop reacting emotionally to someone else's inconsistency, you regain clarity. And clarity leads to better decisions, better boundaries, and better relationships. But let's go deeper. Why does this even matter? Because how you handle these moments isn't just about them. It's about you. It's about your relationship with yourself. Every time you catch yourself spiraling into self-blame, every time you notice yourself clinging to a negative narrative, you have an opportunity to rewrite that story. You have an opportunity to remind yourself of your worth, independent of anyone else's behavior. And here's the beautiful thing people can feel that shift in you. When you're no longer seeking validation in their responses, when you're no longer acting from a place of fear or insecurity, your entire energy changes. You become more confident, more centered, more magnetic, and guess what? People are drawn to that energy. They respect it. They respond to it. And this is important, this isn't just about attracting other people. This is about you. Because at the end of the day, the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship in your life. If you're constantly attaching your self-worth to someone else's replies, you're building a foundation on shaky ground. But when you can stand tall, knowing your value doesn't diminish in silence, you become unshakable. So here's my challenge to you the next time someone doesn't reply, notice the story you're telling yourself. Ask yourself, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this the story I want to believe? And if the answer is no, rewrite it. Replace it with a story that empowers you instead of diminishes you. Because your mind is always listening, and the story you tell yourself shapes the reality you experience. In the end, remember this, someone else's inconsistency doesn't define you. Their silence doesn't make you less worthy. And your value isn't something that can be given or taken away. It's something you carry within you. Own that. Trust that. And watch how your world starts to shift when you stop letting someone else's silence become your story. At the end of the day, communication isn't just about words, it's about respect, reciprocity, and boundaries. When someone doesn't reply, it's easy to fall into the trap of chasing, over-explaining, or creating stories in your mind that chip away at your self-worth. But here's the truth, silence isn't always a reflection of your value. Often, it's a reflection of the other person's priorities, mindset, or circumstances, and your response to that silence. That's where your power lies. You have to remember that your time, your energy, and your attention are valuable. They're not things you give away freely to people who aren't willing to meet you halfway. Sometimes the most powerful message you can send is no message at all. Sometimes the strongest response is to step back, hold your silence, and let the space speak louder than any words could. But this isn't about playing games, it's about showing self-respect. It's about recognizing when to lean in and when to let go. It's about understanding that clarity comes in stillness and that your worth doesn't diminish because someone else failed to acknowledge it. The way you carry yourself in moments of uncertainty sets the tone for how others will treat you moving forward. So as you move forward, remember this, don't chase, don't beg, don't fill the silence out of fear. Instead, pause, reflect, and most importantly, trust. Trust that the people who value you will show up. Trust that your worth isn't determined by someone else's response. And trust that sometimes stepping back isn't losing, it's leading. Because the people who truly see your value won't need reminders to meet you where you stand. In a world full of noise, let your presence and sometimes your silence speak for itself. And when you do that, when you own your space and honor your worth, you won't have to chase anyone. The right people will find their way to you.